Positive Solutions with Dr. Gordon is a podcast which focuses on contemporary social and educational issues from an educational leadership and behavioral research perspective. We will delve into those issues that are important to you as we listen to understand the needs of others and positively respond to address those needs, concerns, and/or fears. Professionals in their respective fields of expertise, in addition to friends of the podcast, will share their unique perspectives of positive solutions to what matters to you most. Join us every Sunday afternoon at 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central Time, as we share positive solutions to those issues that are important to you.
A very pleasant good morning and welcome to Positive Solutions with Dr. Gordon podcast. We're very fortunate to have with us today a good friend of the podcast. He's been on before in season 1, and he's going to start us off with season 2, which is going to run from March to the month of May, and you will see him every first Sunday. So you get to see him this first Sunday, which is March 7th, and then you'll get to see him in April and then in May again. And I'm talking about none other than Pastor Peter TeWinkle, pastor of the St. Croix Reformed Church on the Big Island of St. Croix, United States Virgin Islands. Well, welcome to Positive Solutions with Dr. Gordon, Pastor Peter.
I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Absolutely. It's a joy to have you share your thoughts on restorative justice and how we as an individual can move forward in the 21st century despite our various differences that we have. And that it's okay. As a human race, we have differences of opinions and differences of beliefs, preferences, passions. But how can we combine all of these things together to live in harmony and in unity with each other? So before I stop talking and have Pastor Peter to share his thoughts with us, just want to thank all of you who are listening by way of your favorite podcast app or directory. And also for those of you who are watching us by way of our YouTube channel, don't forget to click subscribe and like, and feel free to leave a comment that you have on your heart or mind that you'd like to share with us. And the podcast is just another platform for us to provide information and resources that would help individuals across the lifespan to enhance their and your social emotional well-being, as well as ours as well. So we have Pastor Peter with us here, and he'll just share some thoughts with us about how we should then live in 2021. 2020 was an eye-opener. 2020 vision was what we got last year so that we can do better in 2021 and moving forward. What do you say about that, Pastor Peter?
Before I dive in, I think that's really true. I remember, and I think I used this in a sermon not too long ago as well, probably at the beginning of the year, that going from 2019 to 2020, people thought, 2019 was such a tough year, such a struggle to get through. And 2020 was going to be so much better. And they used that 2020 vision idea over and over again. I'm going to be clear on my purpose. I'm going to be clear on the direction my life is going. Everything is going to become clear for me. And so when 2020 took the turn that it took and became obviously worse than 2019 was, part of me wanted to say, well, see, there goes your, predictions out the window. But I think you're right in that the COVID pandemic and the stress that all of us went through really gave us a sense of clarity about not only the difference between the haves and the have-nots, but the divide in our politics, how partisan we become. So I think maybe not in the most positive way, but in really important ways, things became clear to us that we may have been washing over or sweeping under the rug. So absolutely, I think we got some sense of clarity over the course of the last year.
Right. It helped to sharpen our perspective, I believe. Well, for me personally, looking back at 2020, it helped to solidify and clarify for me some areas in my own personal life and helped me to rethink and reimagine possible in various aspects of my life, professionally as well as personally. So those challenges that did occur in 2020, though tough they were, and we're still feeling the residual effects of that in 2021, it still helped to sharpen my vision, for example, and knowing where I needed to be and which direction I need to moving forward in 2021. And
Yeah.
I've heard other individuals echo that as well. So those challenges were tough, but it was part of that diamond in the rough that sharpens and presents that precious stone in the end. But it's tough. And so how do we navigate the times that are tough, especially
Yeah.
for those who may not have those resources?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So as far as the church institution goes, I think we had a similar experience overall, that on the one hand, things we took for granted, like Sunday morning worship, all of a sudden people realized, gosh, that played a pretty important role in my life. I really needed that. And so, being able to connect via Facebook Live or Zoom or YouTube, whatever app people were using, and then at least down here, ever so slowly being able to come back in person, I think people reconnected with the purpose of that in their lives, and felt again kind of the importance of it. And then on the other side, I think, I hope, leaders of the church began to recognize all of the ornamentation that maybe not be necessary, so that we can get to other work that might be more essential to the church. All the stuff we busied ourselves with may not have been that important, and there's more essential work that we can get to, that's part of the church's calling, as we move forward into the next year.
So 2020 and all of those challenges that did occur helped to sharpen our vision and to reimagine possible. Whereas in education, you mentioned the church, and I agree, I concur with you. Individuals, leadership in church have found different ways to make it possible to maintain that community of individuals to come together. And even in education, we have found ways to provide instruction and learning 100% virtually. And just recently, we're now starting to slowly and gradually have students return to school face-to-face in a brick and mortar building along with their teachers and administrators. And right in here in the St. Croix district, for example, we're doing kindergarten through third grade for those parents who want their children to return to school.
Yeah.
And then those special populations of those who are receiving specialized services and special education. And then, of course, we have our seniors who are in our vocational school who need the hands-on hours in order to receive certification. So they are back in school with the safeguards in place. Those who are in 4th through 12th grade, we're still continuing virtually 100% because we want to make sure that everyone continues to remain safe and to protect our entire community. And I applaud leadership for thinking things through and for putting everyone's health and safety first. And as I reflect just a couple of days ago, or just yesterday, this past week, some states have said, oh, let's do away with the COVID restrictions, and they're opening up full force. And that's not, in my opinion, wise as a leader to put your constituents at risk. So
yeah. We're doing what we can, and we have opportunities to take advantage of.
Right. So how do individuals who might be emotionally and socially struggling at this time, and also spiritually, what are some things that would be of support and empowerment for them during this time of opportunity?
Yeah. I think it's really important, and we're learning. I don't know if we talked about this last time we were together, but one of the things that, one of the fields of study that's really kind of opening up is kind of neurobiology, neuroscience, physiology, and things like that. And one of the things we're learning is how much stress and traumatic experiences can really add up inside our bodies physically. And so I was just reading about this again the other day in a book about compassion, of all things. And it says, when you're in stressful situations or experience a traumatic event, the normal human reactions are to fight back, are to flee, are to freeze. And we're sort of adding another one, which is to fawn, which is kind of like I can't remember what the syndrome is called, but you fawn over the perpetrator. Um, and in those experiences, our bodies naturally produce chemicals which are helpful to us. If you're running away from a bear, you need a dose of adrenaline to
Right.
get away, to run as fast as you can.
For that short period of time, but not for an
that sort of-
extended period of time,
Yeah,
right?
and that's exactly the point. If you are in repeatedly stressful or traumatic experiences, those chemicals that your body naturally produces become toxic. And if you don't find a way to process them and to remove them from that, it starts resulting in other physical ailments. And so I think we did talk about ACEs, adverse childhood experiences last time. And it's not just children. I mean, we all have had a whole bunch of adverse experiences over the course of the last year.
Right.
And there are simple things we can do, like breathing, like meditation, like
Mindfulness, right?
mindfulness, connecting in relationships. And I think a big one for me is being active in changing your environment and your community, being civically and politically engaged, so that you feel like you have a sense of agency again. Because I think one of the things that happens when we're experienced to difficult things over and over again is we start to accept them and say, this is the way it is. There's nothing I can do about it. They have to do it, whoever the they is.
Right.
It just leaves us feeling disempowered. And that does sort of perpetuate the cycle of harm that makes us feeling not only not good about ourselves, but sometimes physically sick.
Right. But having that forward movement of actively doing something triggers the chemicals or the hormones within our body or in our brain to know that I'm accomplishing a task for the common good for everyone. And it's a feeling that it feels good. Those hormones releases those feel good feelings, the endorphins and the dopamine. Yeah. So you want to repeat doing those acts. And some might say, well, that sounds very selfish. Well, it's one part of it might be because you want to feel good about what you're doing, but you're also focusing, the objective is, what can I do to enhance and to support and empower others? So that's not selfish, that's being helpful to a larger community while getting the help that you need for yourself as well. And does a support network also help as well?
Absolutely.
In place, yeah.
The word I've been using to describe what you just said is mutual. Like there's mutual benefit in our engagement in society, mutual benefit in reaching out to support one another. So not only if I reach out to help you, you get some help, and I do receive some sense of agency and purpose, and allowing you to do the same for me just flips the script and makes it, and the same thing true vice versa. So
and finding philanthropic activities that folks can work with, or within the church or within the school, civic organizations, getting involved, like you correctly said, helps one to feel like, number one, they're in control, they have a say, they have a voice and a sense of purpose, and then two, you actually are actively working towards a solution, towards whatever that issue might be.
Right. Yeah. One of the things I've preached 2 sermons recently, and something that's really stuck with me in those 2 sermons is how Jesus is sort of taking to task society's expected leaders. And so 2 weeks ago, I preached about the Good Samaritan story. And if your listeners are familiar with that parable that Jesus tells, there's somebody who's been beaten and robbed and left for dead in the middle of the road. And along comes a priest. And the priest sees what's happened, probably is uncertain about how to respond and the safety in responding. And so he crosses to the other side of the road and goes on his way. And then along comes a Levite, same thing, uncertain about how to respond, doesn't feel safe, crosses to the other side of the road and goes on his merry way. And if people are familiar with that day and age, they know that the line between politics and religion for the people in Judea was pretty fuzzy. So who was in charge and who made decisions and how resources were allocated, the temple and the throne were sort of mixed together. And Jesus is kind of saying, I think, implying in this parable that it's not your position, it's not your title, it's not your tribe that makes you good, that gives you credibility or authority. As the story goes on, a foreigner comes along, a good Samaritan, someone kind of
One who
looked
you would
down,
least expect to provide
you
this
would least expect, comes along, and there's this outpouring of
compassion.
generosity and compassion and personal investment from this guy. And Jesus says, go and do likewise. And so there is this sort of criticism of the authorities of the day by using someone you would least expect and lifting up this kind of compassionate generosity as a path forward for us as humanity, which is
Right.
really important.
Right. No, absolutely. And I did listen to that sermon, and I like that. And I share. I'm glad you shared that message with the listening and the viewing audience. And so I also highly recommend folks to go to, is it the St. Croix Reformed Church? They can perhaps go in the archive and access that sermon.
Yeah, so that was 2 weeks ago. So that was the 21st of February. You can see it at stcroixreformed.org, or go to our Facebook page, St. Croix Reformed Church, and find the video from February 21st.
And you said something that was key as well in the sermon, if I'm remembering correctly, where someone asked a question, posed a question to Jesus about, well, who's my neighbor? And you said Jesus didn't answer the question. He gave this parable, and he demonstrated what the attributes of a good neighbor is.
Absolutely. The question came from a lawyer, right? And the lawyer's like,
surprise, surprise.
Yeah, he asked Jesus, how do I inherit eternal life? And Jesus says, love God, love your neighbor. And then the guy, I think, wanting to maybe test a little more or prove, look, maybe I'm smarter than you are, says, well, who is my neighbor?
Well, who's my neighbor? Right.
Yeah, and Jesus tells this whole parable and doesn't answer the question, because at the end of the parable, Jesus asked the lawyer, so which one was the neighbor to the person who was attacked? And the lawyer answers, the Samaritan was, and then Jesus says, go and do likewise. So in effect, excuse me, Jesus was answering the question, what does it mean for me to be a neighbor?
And I'm
so
thinking,
I really felt,
go ahead. Finish.
I really felt like the lawyer was trying to say, okay, I understand I need to love my neighbor, but what's the smallest circle of people that I'm responsible for? What's the least I have to do and still get what I want? And Jesus flips it upside down and says, no, that's not the question. The question is, how can I, as I'm going about my daily business, be the most compassionate, generous version of myself, no matter who I'm encountering or what situation I'm in.
Perfect. And Jesus is known as a master teacher. So I'm thinking as an educator, because here it is, the lawyer asks the question, and Jesus poses a story, a parable, and allows the lawyer to apply critical thinking skills to answer the question himself. And that's what we do. That's what we do with our students when they ask us, well, what is so-and-so? So as a good teacher, you would say, well, why don't you go to Google this information, then you share back out to the class. Now, what do you think is the correct answer? So it puts the ownership of learning on that student. So I like how Jesus modeled for us good teaching. And the lawyer perhaps was trying to be, like you said, was perhaps trying to catch Jesus or try to not give us much, or as he's in his response to, well, how do I treat my neighbor? And so he wants to do as little as possible. And so based upon that parable, now how do you respond? And so the lawyer is forced to come up with a response. Well, the one that showed the merciful compassion and all that it entails and goes along with that, it was not politically correct at that time, because the Jews and the Samaritans, they did not mix at all. And so here it is, it was a Jew that was in need, and the Samaritan came and provided the help. And the leadership, that society at that time expected to have responded in a compassionate and positive way. The Levi and the priests of all people, they pass on the opposite side. So what is the relevancy of that parable to us today in 2021? As I think about it, what is our role and what is our responsibility as a good neighbor? Is it limited to our positions, our titles, our salary, or is it the condition of our heart? And what do you think?
Yeah, both. So I think there are two sides to the coin. I think it sort of says to people who are in positions of leadership and authority, whether that's in the church, in the government, maybe even in the education system, that your title gives your authority and credibility is not in the fact that you have a title or
Exactly.
are a part of the right group.
Right.
So that's one side of the coin, because compassion and generosity and mercy are lifted up as like core values, it does kind of open up the door for ordinary people to be engaged in change and in helping people out. That it isn't just the people with titles
Right.
and positions that we should be looking to make the change. We can take it upon ourselves to make the changes that we want to see. And so I think that's really important. I think especially, I think there are a lot of dynamics at work, but in a place like St. Croix or in the territory, people look to the government to do a lot for us. And I hesitate to say that because sometimes that gets spun in a way where, it becomes all about personal responsibility and all about individual duty. And I'm not saying that. I think the government has an important role to play. But I don't think the government functions best in isolation from an active, engaged citizenship.
Right.
And so us doing our part makes the whole thing function a lot better.
And on the flip side of that coin, and I agree with you, as we think about what happened just a week or two ago in Texas, where certain individuals who had to resign made some comments saying, don't expect the government to do all of this for you. Pull yourselves up by the bootstraps and go find your own electricity, find your own water.
Yeah.
So there's still a level of responsibility, yes, on citizenship, but also the government. So we have to strike that proper, appropriate balance. And
Right.
that was just very cold and heartless, which was mentioned a few weeks ago, and that person in leadership had to resign because of
Thankfully.
that comment. And so that wasn't a good example of being a good neighbor. Where was the heart of compassion at the time? Yes, we each have our own responsibilities, and we need to fulfill those and not wait for a handout or for someone to do something for us. But if we are in a position where we can lend a helping hand, regardless, as like you said correctly, to position, power, status, that's not important. How can we help? How can we
Yeah.
be used to serve others? And I think that was lost 2 weeks ago by that person making that comment. So you say one, you say two. So we each have a responsibility, and we each are our own leaders in our own right. What are we doing with what we have been given to be used in a way that's helping others for the
Yeah.
common good of others?
Yeah. And I think the thing I want to add to that at the same time, something I hope the church picks up over the next year, is that it has a place in advocating for political change or quality leadership in politics. Because the sermon I preached last Sunday really named, like, Pilate was the governor of Judea, Pontius Pilate, right? He was a real political authority of the day. Herod was, I'm not sure, tetrarch, right? But another like legitimately political authority of the day. And in the sermon I preached last week, it's obviously contrasting Jesus, whose titles, by the way, Lord and Messiah, are political things. And what's something that's happened over the course of the centuries is that those have become sort of spiritualized in a sense, but they're really political terms about who's in charge and who's running the show. And so you contrast Jesus with these other two political figures, Pilate and Herod, who, it comes out in the passage, Pilate mingled the blood of people with their sacrifices. So obviously a really brutal, horrible atrocity done out in public. And Herod is threatening to kill Jesus. So you have this real abuse of power taking place. And I think in that same passage, Jesus is the one who says, all I want to do is gather you in like a hen gathers her chicks, right? So that's about as far a contrast as you can get from killing people, is gathering them in and trying to warmly nurture them for the sake of their growth.
Even those who
But
want to kill,
sometimes,
even those who want to kill you and are rejecting your God-given leadership. Yeah.
yeah.
You're listening to the podcast Positive Solutions with Dr. Gordon, which is uploaded weekly on Sunday afternoons at 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central on your favorite podcast directory.
Yeah. And so that to me is a real contrast in, so I think people would say, well, Jesus is a spiritual leader and these are political leaders, and the way Jesus lived isn't realistic for, what we should look for from our political leaders. We should be focused on our spiritual life and saving souls, and that's for politics. And to me, they're just not that easily separated. That
Right.
what God desires for us is a flourishing life. And Jesus is the one who's kind of standing for that in the midst of some real hostile brutality meted out by political leaders of the day. And so I think it was Martin Luther King Jr. who said the church is the conscience of the state. And I don't think we should be bashful about speaking up for things like compassion, generosity, mercy, and something like restoration. We need
Right.
to be taking good care of people who have been beaten down and lifting them up, not just saying, well, oh well, that's their fault, and if they would work harder or get a better education or be more responsible, then life would go better for them. That's just not what Jesus stands for, and I want the church to be more bold in speaking up in that regard.
And also being careful as to who they align their allegiance behind a particular leader. Is that leader demonstrating those quality traits that
Yeah.
we say as a society are very important to us? Having compassion for others, respect for others who might not be of the same socioeconomic status of others, who might have varying different backgrounds. What is our attitude, our tone, our words in regards to various communities for whom we as leaders are responsible? And who are we aligning ourselves with? Whom are we aligning ourselves? And we have to be honest with ourselves. And the excuse or the defense is, well, I'm aligning myself with a platform, not necessarily a person. I hear that, and I understand that aspect of it. However, there are other leaders in that exist that reflect those characteristics and the standards and the values that are important of how we treat each other, that we can align ourselves with those individuals regardless as to which political party one might belong to. There are other leaders that represent what is true and what Christ has modeled for us to follow, and we need to be careful. And January 6th and events leading up to that and after that should teach us all a lesson, and to open up our eyes to being careful and do some more self-reflection as to what do I do next, and who should I follow, and what should I do, what's my responsibility for the common good of everyone else.
Yeah. And so this gets us to that. For me, this gets us to that conversation about restorative justice, because everybody has their own view about how to make things right. We can all see that there are things wrong with the world. And so as difficult as it is for me to say, the people who stormed the Capitol on January 6th, in their mind thought, this is how I'm going to make things right again. This is the method for me to do that. So obviously I don't agree with that. And I might not even agree with them on what making things right means. And that's where, to me, restorative justice plays such an important role in helping a community make things right together. Because restorative justice is contrasted with punitive justice. We did talk about this last time. So briefly, restorative justice is contrasted with a punitive justice, which says, I'm going to make things right by punishing people who do things wrong. That's encapsulated by Pilate and Herod. If somebody wasn't doing what they wanted, so first of all, what they determined was right, and anybody who disagreed, they would be punished, and that's the way things would become right. So we're familiar with punitive justice and punishing to make things right. Restorative justice is also contrasted with distributive justice, which means if things aren't working well, it must mean that somebody doesn't have what they need, and so we should give them things. And that sounds better to me, but it also has that same potential of disempowering people, because we don't take the time to sit down and figure out what's really going on. We just kind of throw money at it and hope that everything works out in the end. But to me,
you haven't really dealt with the issue.
Yeah, you haven't really dealt with the issue, and giving people things is another way of saying, I don't really want to relate to you. I don't really want to be in a relationship with you. I want to give you this so that you go away and I don't have to think about you anymore.
Right.
So it's in a sense like punishing. Like, I'm going to punish you so that you go away and I don't have to think about relating to you anymore. And what is core to restorative justice is the idea that we sit down in a circle together, we find the truth together, and then we figure out how to make things right, and we do it together. And so you began the podcast by saying, in 2021, as we move forward, with all of our different experiences and different perspectives and different backgrounds, how are we going to move forward together? And to me, that's it. It's doing the really hard work of sitting down together, listening to one another, discovering the truth together, and then taking action together.
And listening to understand, not listening to have a reaction, to shut things down, or coming with a preconceived idea or decision already made, saying, I'm not going to support anything that this other side says because it might make them look good, and then it's not in my best interest. So is that really doing justice, restorative justice, for the common good of everyone? Or is that a selfish motivation because of a political or personal or financial reason? Again, it's about self and what's convenient for a select few, as opposed to what is really truly helpful for all of us to move forward together collectively, because we have varying differences of what we might think is right or wrong, but what is something that we can come collectively and agree with and move forward together?
Yeah. So I think the thing I would add to that, because as you say that, I reckon people have helped me see how even something like restorative justice, and one of the core practices of restorative justice is a restorative circle, which is literally a circle of people and a talking piece sharing their perspectives. So people have helped me to see how even in a restorative circle, there can be power dynamics at work that still prevent people from engaging as a collective. And so if you have a really wealthy person in a circle and some really impoverished people in a circle, that really wealthy person is going to have a much greater sense of agency and sense of authority,
self-efficacy compared to the other.
I get to speak to this. I know the answers. Everybody should listen to me, that sort of thing. And the impoverished people can come into a circle with a lack of self-efficacy or a feeling like, yes, this is my fault. And I don't have the skills or the knowledge to make any change. So I think even in setting up circles, there has to be an awareness of those power imbalances. We could talk about how men and women enter a circle. We can talk about how white people and non-white people enter a circle. There's an author named Eric Law who has written a lot about how people come to the table with different perspectives and different motivations, and how that will have an impact on how they engage and how they share their voice.
Right. In education, we use behavioral norms. So before we even get started, here are the norms that we're going to agree to. We have a discussion about it. We set those ground rules in place. And as we proceed, if anyone is violating those norms, we pause and go back to those behavioral norms again. So you set the boundary and you
Yeah.
set the expectations, and then you move forward, realizing that we each are going to come with our own biases based upon our environment, based upon our upbringing, our background, but being honest enough with ourselves to know that we're bringing these biases to the table, and we have to explore those biases. And then again, the essential question that we need to have at the beginning of this restorative justice in that circle is, what is in a common good for all of us? What is important to us? And I remember in season 1, when we had our conversation, you talked about some of the issues in conflict that we see comes from the perception of not being heard or being respected. My needs is not being met, or your needs are not being met. And what's at odd? And if we can just pause for a second to realize what each of our needs are and how we can move forward, that's also part of that restorative justice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and so there is something, I think over the last 40 years, maybe 50 years, that at least in church circles, we've been talking about something. Some churches have been talking about God's preferential option for the poor. And that's a sort of loaded phrase. And
Yeah, please unpack that.
Right. It can be met with a lot of resentment, because it sounds like on the surface that God prefers poor people and dislikes rich people. On the one hand, I can find some good evidence in scripture to justify that perspective, but that's not what it means. It's like the easiest metaphor, I think, is like to say that firefighters have a preferential option for the houses that are on fire. It doesn't mean that they dislike or don't care about the other houses,
Right.
but they're going to focus their attention on the ones that are on fire, because they're the ones with the most needs.
Yeah.
And so I think as a society, we have this understanding of equality. That means everybody should get the same, and that's equal. But if you do something like
equity,
if you do something like affirmative action, that's not fair. That's reverse racism or whatever. If you give too much to somebody to help them get back onto a level playing field, that's not fair. You're giving them too much. But what something like preferential option for the poor suggests to us is that we need to really be concerned with the least of these among us, and that Jesus's words, "The last shall be first," ought to be taken seriously by us. That when we sit in a restorative circle and we try to figure out how to make things right, we start with those who have gotten the short end of the stick and work our way from there.
I think that's where
I think that's hard for people to accept still, because it offends their sense of equality. But the reality is things are not equal right now. And the only way we make things equal is by really targeting those who are most suffering from that inequality. And that's what needs to be worked out in a restorative circle and in a mutual way.
Right. And you mentioned affirmative action. And so people would say that that's why that came about, because it was not equal, where individuals of color were rejected or not accepted into schools of higher learning. And it's not about based on the complexion of one's skin that they just get in. I mean, they have to meet the mark, and the criteria is also the same as those who may not be of color, but it provides an opportunity for those of color who have the ability to work as hard as anyone else, as their counterparts, to do well. So that was the initial intent for the affirmative action. I've heard that argument about it's being reversed racism, but the historical reason behind that was to ensure that the playing field was level for everyone, and it was a matter of equity, not just about equality. But again, it's all a part of the conversation as to what do we do in the 21st century, where we should be improving and becoming better, as opposed to regressing to like 50 years ago. And again, what are we attaching our star behind and aligning ourselves with? What ideology or person that is leading that type of ideology that hinders communities as a whole, the human race, from moving forward and doing better? And so we're seeing it loudly and clearly as we look at what's happening in Congress and in the Senate, which impacts all of our lives. Even though we're on the big island of St. Croix, like I like to say, we are a territory. And so we are affected. I mean, the whole world is affected because we are all interconnected. The governor, he was talking a few months ago about the pandemic, and he made an analogy that we have heard before here, where he says, if the United States sneezes, we in the Virgin Islands catch the cold.
Sure. Yeah.
Whatever affects the United States affects the territories as well. Whether it's Puerto Rico, the U.S. Virgin Islands, the Mariana Islands, American Samoa Islands, it affects us all, Guam. So we have a right to speak up, because some folks might say, well, what are you talking about? I mean, you're on an American Paradise Island, that's not your business. No, it is our business.
Yeah.
And again, how do we move forward using our platforms, whether it's the ministry, preaching the word, whether it's education, whatever the platform is, what are we doing with what we have been given? Because to whom much is given, much is expected. And to do so with efficacy. And hence Positive Solutions with Dr. Gordon, the podcast, where it provides that opportunity to enhance the social emotional well-being of others across the lifespan. And that's the mission of the podcast. And in season 2, moving into season 3 and beyond, it's a network that has been developed. And so we're working behind the scenes. I mean, I do have a day job and I'm sticking with the day job. But with the podcast, it has taken on a life of its own beyond my wildest expectations, because at the ending of May, going into the ending of this season 2, going into season 3, and we keep short episodes. So it's like we had 12 episodes for season 1. For season 2, it'll be short episodes of about 10 to 12 as well. Because I have a job and I have other responsibilities. But part of the podcast is also going to include having, for example, a scholarship fund for our graduating high school seniors within the territory. And so far, there are about 3 potential scholarships that can be offered to graduating high school seniors once they meet the criteria that we're working the wording of it right now. So that's an opportunity to help to facilitate those who want to learn and expand their learning, and giving them that opportunity to do so. There's a website of resources that's under construction right now. So anyone, anywhere in the world can go to and access the resources. And there are various links that people can go to access the resources on the podcast. There's also conversation about a virtual summer symposium where and again, rethinking or reimagining possible. Now we don't have to go to a hotel in California or anywhere, which I love to travel, and I would love to still do that once the pandemic has dissipated a bit and folks have become vaccinated. But we can do things, have a summer symposium or conference virtually, and I've attended quite a number of them. So that's also part of the process of the podcast. And then we're also vetting for a research team and also an instructional team. And so it has taken on a whole other life. So at the ending of season 2, going into season 3 for the summer, I'm hoping to have everything solidified, and schools should be out by then, will be out by then. And so I can spend more time to get this off of the ground. So it's a network of resources to support and empower individuals across the lifespan, regardless as to socioeconomic backgrounds, political ideology, or affiliation, whatever. Can we live as human beings in the 21st century doing better than we have been? Yeah.
Can I offer two parting thoughts on that?
Please, yes.
This conversation has been helpful for me because I think 2 things have really risen to the surface, and I use these hashtags in a lot of my Facebook posts. But the first one is, I think if we're going to do better moving forward, the first thing we really have to do is take good care of ourselves, keeping in mind the legitimate effect that trauma and stress have on our bodies and on our brains. I think there is sort of an American go get 'em attitude that says if you're having a hard time, you just work harder and you just push on through and you pull yourselves up by your bootstraps and everything is fine and you never admit any problems. And that's just not working for us. I think that comes out in really negative ways, physically and relationally.
Right.
So number one is take really good care of yourself. Get enough sleep, get enough exercise, eat healthy, pray, meditate, be mindful, breathe, whatever you need to do to take care of yourself, you have to prioritize one way or another. And the other one is to take action. I really don't want people to be bashful about holding their political leaders accountable. And I really would hope that we as a community could trust that those who are most impacted by the problem have the best solution to resolving it. I think the mindset is typically like, well, those people are struggling with the problem, we have to fix them, and we know how to do that best. And I think a lot of what we're seeing is, one, that doesn't work because we're dealing with the same problems over and over. And two, it disempowers people who are struggling right now. And so taking action for me means people in position of authority sitting down with people most impacted by the problem and taking seriously the idea that they know how to best resolve those problems. Because people who have knowledge and have money and resources typically devote them to what they think is best, and it doesn't always work. So taking action for me incorporates that restorative process, but gives special voice to those most impacted by the problem.
It respects individuals as well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Absolutely.
yeah.
So, take care and take action this year.
There you go. I like that motto. Take care and take action. I like that. Okay,
Yeah.
and I'm going to use that with your permission. Take care and take action.
Anytime.
You know what's interesting is that next the following Sunday. So every first Sunday, for those who are listening and viewing this, Pastor Peter is going to be on with us to share his thoughts on restorative justice and how we can enhance our lives moving forward in the 21st century. So you'll hear him and see him again in April, and then also in May, the first Sunday. Now, you're talking about mindfulness. On the second Sunday of each month for this season, so I'll be this month, March, then April, and then May, we have a life coach, and she was on in season 1, and her name is Elizabeth Olexa. She goes by Liz. She's a certified life coach. So you get to have a certified life coach sharing her thoughts as well the second Sunday of each month. And I recommend that you look back to season 1. She has a phenomenal story. She lost her vision, and she is just amazing. She completed her degrees, her license, her certification for life coaching, and you can't tell that she is visually impaired just by how she just communicates, as if there's nothing wrong with her. And there's nothing wrong with Liz. She's dynamic. So you'll get to see and hear her the second Sunday of each month. And then on the third Sunday, guess what? We have a treat. We have Island Therapy, who is coming in and will be also sharing information with us in March, and also April, and also in May. So we have Island Therapy the third Sunday of each month. And then the last Sunday, there's a Spanish version of the episodes. You get to see and hear Dr. Migdalia Cruz Atherton from our sister island of St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands, and Dr. Sally Camacho and myself as we speak in Spanish and share with the Hispanic community about issues that are important to them and offering positive solutions to assist them as well. So it's a nice season jam-packed with wonderful support to empower and enhance the social emotional well-being of individuals across the lifespan.
Wonderful.
So any last thoughts you want to leave with us before we conclude?
I think we've covered it. Really appreciate being asked back onto the show and continuing this conversation. I'm hoping, we had a really horrible weekend here on St. Croix with gun violence. And from what I'm hearing, there were a couple of more incidents last night.
I see it, correct.
And so I'm really hoping that by the time our next show happens in April, I have had a couple of gatherings with men and young men to talk about how they might stem the tide of gun violence, taking seriously that they know best how to resolve these issues. So I hope to be able to report back, and we'll be using restorative practices to pull that about. So hopefully we can talk about that.
That's a good topic that we will talk about. And thank you for sharing that. And there's some information, there's lots of good resources out there that we'll dialogue more about in April. And
awesome.
And thank you so much, Pastor Pete, for sharing your thoughts. And we will remember to take action and to take care. So
Absolutely.
I think we need to take care first, and then we take action. Take care of
Take care,
ourselves,
then
and
take
then
action. Yeah.
yeah, we're in a better position of mindfulness and healthfulness in order to make those positive social change in today's world. So, folks, we have faith, we have hope, and we have love. And the greatest of these is love. Let's start by loving ourselves, loving God, who gives us the ability and the opportunity to do better. So let's do better. And then let's love our neighbors as we love ourselves. Have
I
a
can say
great
amen to that.
amen. So let it be.
Right.
All right. So we'll see you at our next podcast.
Looking forward to it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining Positive Solutions with Dr. Gordon as we learned about different perspectives of contemporary social and educational issues. We hope to educate and encourage as we analyze those topics that are important to you. Please continue to join us every Sunday afternoon at 5 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Central, as new episodes are uploaded on your favorite podcast directory. Remember, become that positive difference that creates a positive outcome in the lives of others, as well as in your own life. See you next Sunday afternoon on Positive Solutions with Dr. Gordon.